Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
The very attempt to map the boundaries of possible knowledge seemed to require standing outside those boundaries, achieving a perspective that might itself be impossible.
Mind at all times. If you don't, the monsters will come for you. The call ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. Was this all part of the same twisted game? Or was there something else to it? Something darker? I didn't know. And I didn't care. I had made my choice. The next morning, I boarded the train to the village. I could feel the eyes of the other passengers on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that no one would understand. Not until they saw it for themselves. The train ride was long and silent, the landscape outside the window a blur of gray and green. When I arrived at the station, I was alone. No one greeted me, no signs, no welcoming faces, just the heavy weight of the fog pressing down on the platform. I walked through the village, the buildings empty, decaying, abandoned. There were no children playing, no dogs barking. It was like the place had been forgotten by time itself. And yet, despite the emptiness, there was a strange presence, something waiting. Finally, I reached the gate, iron, weathered by time, covered in moss. The key in my pocket felt heavy as I stood before it. I knew in that moment that this was it. The decision I had made was irreversible. The gate wasn't just a symbol of the village, it was the key to everything, the monsters, the rules. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I turned the key, there would be no going back. The village felt heavier now, its silence almost oppressive, and as I stepped closer to the gate, I realized something. I hadn't just accepted a job. I'd entered a world where rules governed not only what I did, but what I survived. And I couldn't help but wonder, was I walking into a nightmare, or had I just become part of one? The village of sorrow was unlike any place I'd ever seen. Stepping into it, I felt as though I had entered another world, a world forgotten by time. The fog clung to everything, and the air was thick and damp, swirling around ancient trees that towered above. The houses were sparse, old, and appeared abandoned. The roads were deserted, and not a sound could be heard, only the wind howling through the cracked windows, creating a sound like whispers. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming, as if I had stepped into a place outside of time, where everything was waiting for something. As soon as I entered the village, an old man appeared through the mist. He wore a worn coat, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed. His gaze was intense, and when he looked at me, there was no hint of warmth. He didn't greet me. Instead, he stared for a long moment and then spoke. "You're the new watcher, aren't you?" I nodded, unsure of what to say, but he didn't let me respond. "The first thing you need to understand," he began in a hoarse voice, "is the rules. The rules are what keep this village safe. Follow them, and you'll survive. Break them, and you won't see the dawn." At first, I thought he was just another paranoid old man, but the seriousness in his voice made me stop. There was no humor in his tone, no trace of mockery. "Rules?" I asked, confused. "What kind of rules?" He fixed his gaze on me, and for a moment I could see a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, as if he had seen things he couldn't forget. "There are 4 rules. Follow them and you'll be fine. Break them and you'll set something free. Something you don't want to deal with." He placed a hand on my shoulder as if to transfer some unspoken weight to me. "Remember them. You can't change anything once you're here. If you decide to stay, you have to follow the rules." Then he handed me a piece of paper, yellowed and brittle from age. The ink was faded, barely legible in some places. I took it in my hands, the cold paper pressing into my skin. The 4 rules. 1. Never step outside after midnight. 2. Do not speak to anyone you do not recognize. 3. If the church bell rings, stay in the house. 4. Do not open the gate under any circumstances. I looked at the paper, my mind racing. These rules didn't make sense, but the weight of them pressed on me. They weren't just guidelines. They felt like life or death instructions, rules designed to keep me safe, or perhaps to keep something else at bay. Before I could ask more, the old man turned and walked off, disappearing into the fog as silently as he had appeared. His final words echoed in my ears. Remember them. You won't survive if you don't. I stood there for a moment, holding the paper in my hands. The silence of the village wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind, or if this was something real, but I couldn't deny the fear gnawing at me. Those rules were something I had to follow, whether I understood them or not. The first night passed quietly. The village stayed still, and the fog lingered as though it had never left. I followed the rules, or at least the ones I thought I understood. I stayed inside after midnight, didn't talk to anyone, and avoided the church bell, which, fortunately, didn't ring. But the second night was different. I woke to a sound, faint at first, like something brushing against the walls, but it grew louder. It wasn't the usual noises of the night, like creaking wood or rustling leaves. No, this was something else, something more insistent. Whispers, low guttural sounds, like voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, edging closer. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed to the window, peering out through the fogged glass. The village was still, shrouded in mist. But then I saw them. Figures standing still at the edge of the woods. At first, they were just shapes, blurry and indistinct. But as I stared longer, I could see them more clearly. Tall, thin forms with dark hoods, their faces obscured. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like the eyes of predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They didn't move. They simply stood there, watching. The air around me seemed to grow colder. My breath caught in my throat. The rules, those damn rules, kept coming back to my mind. I had to follow them. I knew that, but I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I broke one. What if I went outside? What if I broke the silence? I backed away from the window, my legs unsteady, my mind racing. The rules weren't just superstitions. They weren't just some old village folklore. These creatures, whatever they were, weren't just shadows. They were real. And if I violated the rules, they would come for me. I stood there in the dark, unable to tear my eyes from the figures outside. They were still there, unmoving, as if they were waiting for me to make a move. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The rules weren't optional. They weren't just for safety. They were chains, and the monsters were the ones holding the key. I looked back at the paper, now crumpled in my hand, the rules staring back at me with a silent, terrifying demand. I had no choice. I had to follow them. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, the figures in the woods still watching. But I didn't move. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, not daring to look away. The rules were clear. I couldn't step outside after midnight. I couldn't speak to anyone I didn't recognize. I had to stay inside when the bell rang, and most importantly, I couldn't open the gate. The monsters were close. And every moment I stayed in this village, I could feel the weight of the rules pulling me deeper into whatever dark fate lay ahead. I couldn't explain why the village was like this. I couldn't explain the monsters, the rules, or the silence. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. If I didn't obey, I wouldn't survive the night. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. These rules weren't just to keep the monsters away. They were the only thing standing between me and a fate worse than death. The village was quiet that evening, the kind of stillness that presses down on you, fills the air with something more than just silence. The fog had rolled in thicker than before, swallowing the streets and blurring the lines of the houses. The trees stood like dark sentinels in the mist, their branches swaying softly in the wind. But there was something wrong about the way they moved, unnatural, almost like they were alive. I sat by the window, staring into the dark. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second stretching out like a reminder that time here was different, that the rules I'd been given were there for a reason. But despite the warnings, the fear, the constant unease, I couldn't stop myself from looking outside, couldn't stop myself from wondering if it was just my imagination, or if something was truly out there. I had spent the last few days trying to adjust to the village, trying to make sense of the rules, but nothing felt right. The villagers were distant, cold, and their eyes always seemed to be watching me, following my every move. It wasn't paranoia, it was something else, something deeper, more primal. I felt like an outsider, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even when I was. The air here felt thick, suffocating, as though it held secrets that it wasn't ready to reveal. I tried to sleep, but the darkness seemed too heavy, the silence too oppressive. The house creaked with the wind, but each creak felt like a whisper, a warning. I couldn't help but feel that something was waiting. The village was holding its breath, waiting for the moment I would break the rules. As the clock struck midnight, everything seemed to pause. The stillness deepened, and the temperature in the room dropped. My breath formed visible clouds in the air. Then, from somewhere far off, I heard it, a sound that cut through the silence like a blade. The bell, the church bell rang. 3 times, a deep resonant chime that seemed to echo through the very bones of the village. I froze. It was the first time I had heard it since I had arrived, and there was no warning. No one had told me about the bell. I had been so focused on the rules that I hadn't even considered it. But I remembered the warning the old man had given me. If the church bell rings, stay in the house. I glanced nervously at the door. It felt as though the village itself was listening to me, waiting for me to make a choice. The rules were there for a reason. They weren't just superstition. They were the only thing standing between me and whatever haunted this place. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to break the first rule. But something inside me, something reckless, urged me to move. I couldn't stay locked in the house forever, not when I didn't understand what was happening. My curiosity, my need for answers, overpowered my fear. I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking, and stepped out the door. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and biting. The fog was so thick that I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The bell continued to toll in the distance, a constant reminder that I was breaking the rule, that I was walking into something I didn't fully understand. But I couldn't stop. I had to know what was out there. I took a few steps down the path, each footfall muffled by the thick fog, the only sound the pounding of my heart in my chest. The village was still, too still. There were no sounds of animals, no wind in the trees. Only the bell ringing in the distance and the strange, unsettling silence that hung over everything. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving through the mist. I turned, expecting to see someone, maybe villager, but there was no one. No one but the fog and the trees. I squinted into the darkness, but it was hard to focus. Everything was blurred by the mist, and then there was movement. A shape shifting in the fog, too quick to be fully seen. I froze, my body locked in place, every instinct telling me to run, but I couldn't. I had to see. The figure was tall, thin, and indistinct, like a wisp of smoke made flesh. It stood there, just outside the edge of my vision, watching me. Its form was fluid, constantly shifting, but its eyes, those glowing eyes, burned through the fog, fixed on me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the air had turned to cement, holding me in place. The creature didn't approach. It didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, as if it was daring me to make the next move. I couldn't breathe. The fear was so thick, it felt like it was choking me. I didn't understand what it wanted, why it was here, or what would happen if I did anything. But I knew one thing. It wasn't alone. There were others. Shadows shifting in the fog, their forms indistinct but equally as unnerving. They were all around me now, closing in from the edges of my vision, standing just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. I stumbled back, my feet unsteady, and I felt the air grow heavier, colder. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be outside with these things. They weren't just shadows. They weren't just ghosts. They were something else. Something ancient. Something that belonged in this village. And they were waiting for me to make a mistake. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog seemed to close in around me, swallowing me whole, but I didn't dare look back. I didn't dare to see if they were following me. All I could do was get inside. When I slammed the door shut behind me, I leaned against it, gasping for breath. My legs felt like jelly. I felt sick, as though the ground beneath me was slipping away. The house was silent again, but I knew something had changed. I'd crossed a line. I'd broken the first rule, and now I was paying the price. I crept to the window, my body trembling, and peered out into the fog. The figures were gone. The village was still, quiet. But the silence wasn't comforting. It felt wrong, as if the village was holding its breath, waiting for me to make another mistake. What were those things? What did they want? Why had they just stood there, watching me? I didn't know. I didn't understand. But I knew one thing for certain. I had broken the first rule, and I had survived. For now. But I wasn't sure how long that would last. The figures had stopped at the gate, but they wouldn't stay there forever. And when they came for me again, would I be able to survive? Would the rules be enough to keep them out? I barely escaped. The figures stopped at the gate, but the terror they left behind lingered. I had broken the first rule, and now I was left with more questions than answers. What are these creatures? What happens if they get inside? The village had warned me, but the question remained. Would the rules be enough to protect me? Or had I already done too much to turn back? The village felt different now. I had been here for days, but every time I stepped outside, something had shifted, like the village was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The creatures I had glimpsed in the fog before, those shadowy figures, now felt more like an inevitable presence, something tethered to the village, something that had always been here. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the mind, shapes in the mist that played with my perception. But as I spent more time here, I realized they were something more, something darker. The creatures, whatever they were, didn't appear anywhere near the village's center. They always lingered near the gate, the boundary that separated this world from whatever was beyond. They were never fully visible, but I could sense them, shapeless, shifting figures that flickered in and out of view. In the fog, their forms seemed to melt and reappear, as if they existed between the fabric of this world and something else. They weren't just shadows or ghosts. There was something alive about them, and they were always near the gate. I had followed the rules, at least for the most part. I stayed inside after midnight, avoided speaking to strangers, and kept my distance from the village's gate. But the more I adhered to these restrictions, the more I began to question them. If the rules were meant to keep the monsters at bay, then why did I feel like they were always just a step behind me? What if I could change the rules? What if I could break this cycle and understand what was really going on? I wasn't sure, but the feeling of being trapped was suffocating. This village, this place, wasn't just some forgotten corner of the world. There was something ancient here, something that went beyond the stories the villagers whispered, and I was beginning to suspect that the monsters weren't the only thing trapped by the rules. I was too. It was the old man who finally told me the truth, or at least a version of it. I was walking near the edge of the village when I saw him sitting in the shadow of an old oak tree, his weathered face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He was alone, his eyes hidden in the deep folds of his face, and when he spoke, his voice was slow, deliberate. "You're the new watcher, aren't you?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of silence. I nodded, unsure of where this conversation was going. The old man sighed, looking at the ground as if searching for something he had lost long ago. "The monsters you see, they're not what you think." He paused as if measuring his next words. "They're cursed beings, creatures trapped here by an ancient force. They've been here long before any of us, and they will stay here unless the rules are kept." I didn't understand at first. "Cursed beings?" I echoed, trying to grasp what he was saying. "They are the remnants of what used to be, once human, but now something else." His eyes flicked up to meet mine, filled with a sadness that seemed to carry centuries of weight. "The village has always been tied to them. They can't leave unless the rules are broken. His words hit me like a wave, crashing over me with their weight. I had always suspected something was off, but this was something different. The gate. It's more than just a barrier, the old man continued. It's the only thing that keeps them contained. But the moment you step outside after midnight, the moment you speak to someone you don't know, the barrier weakens, and they'll come. I didn't know how to respond. I had already broken one of the rules. I had ventured out after midnight, but I was still here. I hadn't seen them attack. What did it mean? Was there something else at play here? The old man looked at me, his gaze piercing. The curse has been passed down for generations. The villagers have learned to live with it, to accept it. But you're an outsider, and you don't know what you're up against. He stood up, his joints creaking, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't break the rules, boy. They'll make you pay for it, and I don't think you want to know what that means. That night I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. The monsters, the curse, everything was starting to unravel. The rules weren't just there to protect us. They were the only thing keeping the village, the land, and maybe even the world from being overrun by the things lurking beyond the gate. But there was still something about it that didn't sit right with me. The old man had spoken of the curse like it was an inevitable part of life here. But what if we didn't have to live like this? What if there was a way to break the cycle, to free ourselves from these rules and the creatures that haunted us? I couldn't stop myself from thinking about it. I'd already broken the first rule. What if I could break more? What if the rules weren't the answer but the problem? I didn't know. But that night, I decided to test it. I walked through the village, staying away from the gate, but keeping an eye out for anything that might give me more insight. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. That's when I saw her. A woman standing just outside the village square. Her face was pale, almost too pale, and her clothes were strange, like they didn't belong in this time. She was tall, her dark hair flowing in the wind, and her eyes, those eyes, glowed faintly, as though they were not from this world. I knew instinctively that she wasn't someone I was supposed to speak to, but something inside me pushed me forward, and before I could stop myself, I spoke. "Who are you?" The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. It wasn't warm. It was something else, something cold. "I've been waiting for you, Thomas." Her voice was like velvet, but there was a chill beneath it, a layer of something ancient and unfathomable. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The fog around us seemed to grow thicker, heavier. "You're not the first to come here." She took a step closer, and I could feel the air around her crackle. "This village, it's an experiment, a containment zone." Her words didn't make sense, but the weight behind them was clear. This village, this curse, it was part of something much larger, something I didn't understand. She took another step forward, and I instinctively stepped back. Her eyes glowed brighter now, as if the darkness around us had begun to respond to her presence. The gate, the curse, it's all part of a grand design. And you, Thomas, you're a part of it too. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The fog was thicker now, and the world seemed to warp around me. I could barely breathe, the air pressing down like a weight on my chest. Before I could move, she faded into the fog, her words lingering in the air like a ghost. "You will never escape, Thomas." The days had begun to bleed into one another, each one dragging on like the one before it. The fog, thick and unrelenting, was ever present, wrapping the village in a cold, suffocating embrace. No matter where I went, it followed me, as if it were alive, breathing with me, feeding off the very air I breathed. But it wasn't just the fog that unnerved me. It was the feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was always lurking just out of sight. Every time I turned a corner, I felt their eyes on me, those figures in the mist, the ones I couldn't quite make out. They had become more distinct, more present. Every night their shapes lingered near the gate, their glowing eyes fixed on me, their movements imperceptible but relentless. I tried to ignore them, but they were there, always just beyond the threshold, waiting for something. The more I stayed, the more oppressive the village felt. Each step I took, each breath I drew, seemed to get heavier. The weight of the curse, of the monsters, seemed to press in on me, tightening around my chest until it felt like I couldn't breathe. I'd followed the rules, but it was becoming harder to keep them. The line between reality and nightmare was starting to blur. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the feeling of something cold, something evil, just outside my door. Sometimes I would hear whispers, low guttural sounds like voices carried on the wind, but I could never find their source. Other times, it felt like the walls of my house were closing in on me, like the village itself was alive, aware of me, watching me. The rules, the ones that had kept the monsters at bay, now seemed like chains, binding me to this cursed place. I had to break free. But I knew deep down the rules weren't just warnings. They were part of something bigger, something older, a ritual to contain these creatures, to keep them from escaping. The moment the rules were broken, the gate would open and the monsters would pour out into the world. The village itself was a trap, and I was caught in its snare. As the days wore on, I began to piece together what the villagers hadn't told me, what they couldn't bring themselves to explain. The monsters, the things I had seen, weren't just random creatures. They were cursed beings, trapped here by a powerful sorcerer who had once lived in the village. His dark magic had twisted them, turning them into something else, something monstrous. And those monsters, trapped by the curse, could only remain in the village if the rules were kept. They had been bound by the sorcerer's magic, but the moment someone broke the rules, the curse would break, and the creatures would be free to roam. The village had been living under the sorcerer's curse for centuries. The villagers had passed down the knowledge of the rules, warning their children and their children's children to protect them from the creatures. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this village wasn't just a place, it was a prison, and I was just another prisoner in it. The monsters weren't just out there. They were connected to everything here, to the land, to the gate, to the rules. I had been following the rules because I thought they would keep me safe. But now I realized the truth. The rules weren't just guidelines for safety. They were a barrier, and if I broke them, I would be unleashing something that could never be put back. The monsters weren't just waiting for me to break the rules. They were waiting for someone to dare break them. As the realization settled in, I felt a surge of desperation. I was trapped. I could keep following the rules, keep pretending that I was safe, but I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. If I stayed, I would be part of the cycle, part of the curse. The monsters would feed off my fear, grow stronger, and eventually they would consume everything. But if I broke the final rule, the rule about the gate, then I could end it. I could stop it all. I could destroy the curse. But at what cost? The gate stood in front of me, like an ancient monument to everything that had gone wrong. The iron bars were thick, blackened by age, and the symbols etched into them glowed faintly in the darkness. I could feel the power of the curse radiating from it, a force that was alive, pulsing with the magic that held the monsters trapped behind it. The creatures were just beyond the gate, just beyond the veil of the village, their presence pressing against the boundary like a dam ready to burst. I'd thought about opening it, about breaking the cycle, but I had never truly understood what it would mean. The old man had warned me, the villagers had warned me, and now I was about to face the truth. If I opened the gate, I would release the monsters, the curse would be broken, and all of the evil locked behind the gate would flood into the world, and I would be the one who set them free. But if I didn't open the gate, if I didn't take that final step, I would be stuck here forever. The monsters would continue to feed on my fear, and the cycle would go on. It would never end. I stood in front of the gate, my hand trembling as I reached toward it. The creatures were close, their presence palpable. The air around me was thick with their hunger, and I could feel it, their waiting, their anticipation. They were watching me. I had come to this point. The gate was the key. It was the only way to escape, but it would also be the means of destroying everything. I took a deep breath and placed my hand on the cold iron. The power of the curse surged beneath my fingertips, a rush of magic that made my whole body shudder. The creatures were close now. I could feel their eyes on me, their hunger. And I knew, deep down, that the moment I broke the final rule, everything would change. I had to make a choice. If I opened the gate, I could end this nightmare once and for all, but I would be releasing the creatures, and there would be no turning back. I would be destroying everything, the village, the people, the world. But if I didn't open the gate, if I stayed locked in this cycle of fear, I would never escape. I would be trapped in the village forever, feeding the curse until there was nothing left of me but a shadow. The choice was mine, and the consequences would be far beyond what I could imagine. As my fingers brushed the gate, I felt the power of the curse surge through me. The monsters were close, their hunger palpable, and I knew that breaking the rules might be the only way to stop them. But it also might be the very thing that would destroy everything. The answer was just beyond the gate, but the cost was something I couldn't yet comprehend. The final night had descended upon me. The weight of it hung thick in the air, heavier than the fog that enveloped the village. I stood before the gate, my hand hovering just above the cold iron. The village around me was silent, suffocating in its stillness. The only sound was the distant hum of my own heartbeat, a constant reminder that I was standing at the precipice of something irreversible. The monsters had grown closer. Their presence was undeniable now. Every time I ventured outside, I could feel them watching me. At night, their glowing eyes would pierce through the fog, always near, but never crossing the gate. Yet even in their silence, their hunger was palpable, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The village had become a prison, and I was the prisoner. The rules, those 4 rules that had governed this place for centuries, had never seemed like much. At first, they were simple. Follow them, and you're safe. But now, standing at the gate, I realized the truth. The rules weren't just for safety. They were the very thing that kept the monsters at bay. Break them, and they would be free. I had followed the rules, but only because I didn't understand them. I had trusted them, thinking they were my protection. But now I could see. The rules weren't the barrier. The village itself was the cage, the gate was the lock, and the monsters were the prisoners. If I opened the gate, I would release them. But in doing so, I could finally end this. The curse would be broken. The village would be free. But at what cost? I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, suffocating me. The monsters were waiting. They were growing stronger, feeding off my fear, but they were also tied to this place, this village, this curse. They were one and the same. If I opened the gate, I would destroy everything, but I would also break the cycle. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the silence around me settle in. The village had been trapped for centuries. I had thought it was just a place, a forgotten, decaying village. But now I understood. It was a containment zone. The monsters were a part of this place, and I was too. Every watcher before me had faced this same decision. Each one had followed the rules, had kept the gate shut, but all they did was delay the inevitable. The curse would never end unless I broke the cycle. I was the last one, the last watcher to face this moment. The gate stood before me, imposing and cold, a reminder of everything I had fought to understand. And as I reached out to touch it, I felt a surge of energy, ancient and powerful, coursing through the air. The gate shifted, as though it recognized my hand. The creatures were closer now. I could feel them, their hunger, their impatience. They were waiting for me to make my move. I had no choice. I had to make a decision. And for the first time since I arrived, I knew what I had to do. I stepped closer to the gate. The air thickened, and the ground beneath me seemed to tremble with the weight of everything about to change. My fingers brushed against the cold iron, and the moment I touched it, I felt a sharp shock, like an electric jolt shooting through my veins. The power of the curse, of everything that had been bound within the village, surged around me, as though it was alive, waiting to be released. And then I heard it, the whisper. It wasn't a sound from outside. It was from within me, deep in my chest, a voice that I couldn't understand but somehow knew. It was ancient, familiar, like something that had been buried in my bones, in my blood. "You can end this," it said. But at what cost? I didn't hesitate. I turned the key, the metal scraping, against the lock, and the gate groaned open. The moment it did, the fog began to swirl more violently, and the creatures surged forward. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel them. Their presence was overwhelming, like a flood that was about to drown everything. The monsters moved toward the gate, their glowing eyes flickering in the darkness, and the air crackled with energy. I stepped back, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Had I done the right thing? Had I broken the curse? Or had I just opened the floodgates to something far worse? The world seemed to shift around me, warping as the creatures passed through the gate. The air grew heavier, the fog thicker, and the earth itself seemed to groan beneath my feet. Everything was changing. The village, the world, everything I had known was slipping away. The monsters weren't just escaping, they were changing the world around them, reshaping reality itself. I felt a cold breath on my neck, and I turned, seeing the creatures' vaguely humanoid forms, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. They weren't what I had expected. They weren't just beasts. They were something older, something more powerful than I could have imagined. And then, in the midst of the chaos, something became clear. The village was never just a prison for them. The curse wasn't just about trapping the monsters. It was about holding everything together. I had thought I was freeing the village, but in reality, I had set everything loose, not just the creatures, but the curse itself. The village was the anchor, and by opening the gate, I had set everything into motion. The monsters surged forward, their power cracking the very fabric of the world. I could feel the pull of it, the weight of everything I had just unleashed. The village behind me was fading, its walls breaking down like glass shattering under the pressure. Was it all worth it? Was I truly free? Or had I just doomed everything to a fate worse than death? As the monsters surged forward, I felt the world shifting around me. The fog thickened, the ground cracked beneath my feet, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend. I had opened the gate, but I didn't know if I had freed myself or if I had just unleashed something far worse. The monsters were free now, but at what cost? Was this the end of the curse? Or had I just brought about something far darker? The answer was slipping away, just beyond my reach.